Good evening, everyone. If you will, open your Bibles up to 2 Chronicles chapter 35. 2 Chronicles chapter 35. I want to do a little bit of kind of historical background here so that we can get an idea of what the context is. Josiah is king, and who is the world empire during Josiah's day? Assyria. But Assyria is on the decline. If we were to look at a map of what the Assyrian Empire looked like at its heyday, it would stretch all the way down and controlling Egypt. Egypt was always struggling for independence from Assyria, but there were others that were struggling for independence from Assyria too, including the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans, what's another name for the Chaldeans? The Babylonians. The Babylonians. All right, so Assyria is in control of this, but a little before Josiah's reign, the Chaldeans gained their independence and began to become a factor to the Assyrians, as far as the Assyrians were having to pull some of their troops back and to attack and fight against the Babylonians. What this did is it allowed Josiah to have more control of the area that Assyria had controlled before. Remember, Assyria didn't control Judah. It did control the area of Israel and Samaria. So you remember when Josiah went and he destroyed all of the altars in Bethel and in Samaria? The reason he was able to do that is because the Assyrians were preoccupied fighting against the Babylonians and others that were trying to take control. So Assyria is greatly weakened during the time of Josiah. And the Babylonians are slowly gaining control, even though they are not extremely powerful at this time. This brings us to the context of what's going to take place today. And I think today's story is somewhat puzzling in the sense that this is not at all what we would expect to happen. Josiah, good king or bad king? Very good king. No king like him. We haven't seen a king as that. The text says that with all of his heart sought the Lord concerning the law of Moses. And so we see that he's very devoted to the Lord. You got anything you want to say before we get into the text here? All right. So verse 20 of 2 Chronicles 35 says this. After all of this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by the Euphrates, and Josiah went out against him. So let's talk about what's going on here. So the Assyrians are fighting the Babylonians, and Egypt sees an opportunity to break away from Assyria. But it's interesting because what's happening here is the Assyrians are actually going to be helped by Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt. Even though the Egyptians have not liked the Assyrians up to this point, they're banding together to go up. You see Carchemish up here on the Euphrates River? The Babylonians and the Assyrians are fighting at Carchemish. Pharaoh Necho is going to come up to help the Assyrians. Any ideas why you think that the Egyptians would help the Assyrians right now? I'm sorry? Oh. I'm sorry? Say it again, please. No idea? All right. Are the Assyrians very strong right now?
They might still be the leading power in some ways, but we just said that they're on the decline, right? So they're vulnerable.
Very vulnerable. Also, are they very oppressive right now, based upon what we've seen with Josiah? No, Josiah can pretty much do what he wants to do. The Egyptians can pretty much do what they want to do too. The Babylonians are power hungry. Would the Egyptians be able to do anything they wanted to do if the Babylonians were in control? No. And Pharaoh Necho kind of recognizes that. And so Pharaoh Necho wants to come up, and what he wants to do is he wants to keep the Babylonians at bay and let Assyria be a buffer zone between him and the Babylonians. That way he can still do what he wants to do. So he's going up to help the Assyrians. How does Josiah and the Israelites feel about the Assyrians? They don't like them one bit. And so it appears that Josiah does not want the Assyrians to get any help from Pharaoh Necho. So he goes out to stop Pharaoh Necho from helping the Assyrians. before we go any further, though, I want us to think back about what has already been prophesied. What was Hezekiah told when he showed the Babylonian envoys all of his treasures? What was he told by God? Where? Where would it go? It would go to Babylon. Now, at this time, by the way, the reason probably that Babylon sent those envoys to tell him, oh, we're so glad you're feeling better, is because only Judah had successfully resisted the Assyrians. Babylon had not. They were under the control of the Assyrians, but were looking for allies to rebel against the Assyrians. That's probably the reason that they came. So God already said, yeah, all of your treasure is going to go to Babylon. So we know that, which would be odd to us at this point since Babylon is not really a power. Have we seen anything else that would give us any indication that Assyria is not going to be the problem, but Babylon would be the problem? Can you think of any of the messages of the prophets? What was the message of Nahum? Yeah, Nineveh is. Nineveh is. Yay, Nineveh has fallen. That's the way Bob Waldron always would say to remember Nineveh. Nahum. Nineveh is fallen. Nineveh has fallen. So we've got a prophet saying Nineveh is not going to be the problem. Babylon is going to be the problem. The Chaldeans are going to be the problem. And Pharaoh Necho already seems to recognize that that's going to be the deal. That's the reason why he's willing to help Assyria at this point.
So that's interesting, right? Because you can see, like, maybe from a physical standpoint, why Pharaoh Necho would want to be involved in this. So if Assyria is still the top dog right now and he's able to help and they win, then it's like, I guess it's one of two things can happen, right? So Assyria is on the decline. Maybe they become more vulnerable and he can kind of, take over after Assyria. Then the second option is if that's not the case and Assyria is still in power, then who are they going to be grateful for? The Egyptians. But that's not the reason that he gives here for making this trek up to go help the Assyrians. And that's interesting.
What's the reason that he gives? God told me to go. And does the biblical writer seem to hold that up as the truth? The biblical writer seems to hold that up as the truth. And so this brings up an interesting question. Why would God tell the king of Egypt to go help the Assyrians? How would that benefit God's plan?
Because it was part of God's plan to take down Assyria.
Okay, but he's telling the king to go help Assyria. Yeah, no, that's okay. I get it confused too. Yes, it's holding back Babylon a little bit longer. Why would that factor into God's plan right now? That's exactly right. So it's holding back the Babylonians so that, because God already said, you won't go into captivity during the life of Josiah. And so maybe that's what's taking place here.
Although it's interesting if that is the case, right?
Because what does Josiah do? He goes out to war against him. And I take it that what Josiah is doing is he's using his own reasoning here, saying, I don't like the Assyrians. I don't want the Assyrians to get any help. I'm going to go out and stop it. And Pharaoh Necho speaks to him and says in verse 21, what have I to do with you, King of Judah? I have not come out against you this day, but against the house of which I have war. For God commanded me to make haste. Refrain from meddling with God who is with me, lest he destroy you. All right.
Which is good advice.
I'm in 2 Chronicles 35. All right. Yes. Hold on. I want to show something here on the map. So if we zoom in a little bit, so Pharaoh Necho is coming up this direction, and he's come up, and this is all going to take place in the valley of Megiddo, right here. And so from Jerusalem, Josiah comes up and meets him there, and that's where this exchange is taking place. And so he's trying to head him off before he gets up there. All right, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the advice he gives here saying, God has commanded me to come, so don't oppose us because he'll destroy you. That's good advice, right? The problem is, I guess, if you're hearing this initially, and you hear who this is coming from Pharaoh Necho, you might be inclined to say, well, I don't know if I believe that. Like, I don't know if I believe this is the case. Have we ever heard a nation come against Judah before and make similar claims about God's behind us and you'll be destroyed? Have we ever heard that? Assyria, right? Assyria. In the days of Hezekiah, something very similar. They come up against Jerusalem and they say, God's with us and we're going to destroy you. Now, what happened in that situation? Was God with Assyria? No, right? And God ended up protecting Judah. So you can maybe see here, in some ways, the suspicion that Josiah might have towards Pharaoh Necho here. But again, and we might not know what was really going on here, except for the fact you're talking about the author makes a special note to say, this was from the mouth of the Lord, right? This was the word of the Lord. And so, again, maybe that brings up some questions, but one thing I think we can all see is that we've seen something like this before, but apparently it's different, actually different circumstances.
Yep. So Josiah would not turn his face away. He disguised himself that he might fight with him. He did not heed the words of Pharaoh Necho. And here's what the biblical author says, from the mouth of God. And so have we seen anything negative from Josiah up to this point? Nothing. So if there's anything said about Josiah, I would say this is it. That on this occasion, he does not heed God's warning, and he does what he wants to do rather than what God had intended for to happen here.
So maybe the main question we can ask is, does he do this intentionally?
Yes.
Right? So does he know that this is actually the will of what Pharaoh Necho is doing is actually the will of God or not? I don't know. Either way, you're right. He does go against the will of God in this, that God has commanded this. And obviously something's going to happen from that. But I think that's my main question is like, Did he know? Like whenever he made the decision, did he know that God actually had told Pharaoh Necho, or did he try to inquire? I don't know. Yeah,
that would have been a really good question. If he would have inquired, maybe he would have been more certain of, okay, I'm doing this in rebellion to God, or I'm certain of that this is God's will and I'm going to back off of it. I don't know. We're not given the details here, but he opposes what God had told Pharaoh Necho to do, and what ends up happening? Yeah. He's shot with an arrow, and he cries out and says, take me away, I'm severely wounded.
Even though he tries to hide himself.
Yeah.
And again, who does that sound like? Okay, I was not thinking Saul. I was thinking Ahab, right? So Ahab is told not to go to war. He does, tries to hide himself, and yet he dies anyway.
A random archer shoots him in the chariot, and he dies in the chariot. That's right. Very same thing. So you've got one of the most wicked kings, and then you've got one of the best kings, and it's like, and you couldn't, this is one of the nicest guys. You'd hate to see this happen to him, and yet it does. So it's a strange story as we get into this to see this happen, because this is not what we would expect at all. And he dies from this wound. And so they put him in a second chariot, and they bring him back to Jerusalem, and they buried him in the tombs of the fathers. And all of Judah mourns for him. Who else mourns besides just all the people of Judah? Jeremiah mourns. I would say that Jeremiah, Jeremiah knows what's coming. We've already read the first 20 chapters of Jeremiah. Jeremiah knows what's coming. And to see this last thread of hope in Josiah to be extinguished would be so heartbreaking. And so the writer here of 2 Chronicles goes on to say, and to this day, the singing men and the singing women speak of Josiah in their lamentations, as it was made custom in Israel, and indeed are written in the book of the laments. And so the sorrow over this was great, because he was a wonderful, wonderful leader. And so here is an interesting point to me. When we're talking about the kings of Judah and Israel, what happened to every single one of them, whether they were good or bad? They died. They died. Here's a really, really good one. We would have liked to kept him around a lot longer, but he dies. You know what would be wonderful? Is if we had a really, really good king that never went against God's plan and will and lived forever. Wouldn't that be wonderful? That would be great. That's what we're looking for. That's what we're waiting for at this time, in this story. So with all of these kings going from David onward, we're looking for that one that's going to be the perfect king. The perfect king. Is Josiah the perfect king? He was a pretty good one. But do you see, at least here's one problem that we have, is he couldn't live forever. He couldn't live forever. And
you want the king who's not stopped by death.
Yes. That's right. Yes.
It's overheating.
Great.
I came up this morning too.
Yeah. Well, I worked on it, and so I've messed it up. All right, I'm going to turn that off so it doesn't like blow up or something. I don't know what'll happen, but we'll go ahead and turn that off, and y'all will just have to do without any visuals. Well, I may not be able to turn it off.
Are we done with this story here?
Yeah, with Josiah, I think so.
Okay. Well, let's turn over to Habakkuk then. So Habakkuk's the other place we're going to look at.
I changed the bulb in it, and apparently that new bulb was hotter or something. I don't know.
Now, in Habakkuk, there might be more you want to say than what I'm about to say, because I'm going to give a very brief overview of Habakkuk. So one thing that's maybe interesting about Habakkuk, he is a prophet, but it seems like most of his message, most of what he has to say, at least that we have recorded here, is not actually said to the people. Most of what he has to say here is addressed to who? Or whom? To God. So in the book of Habakkuk, we have a conversation, basically. And it's not as if we haven't had something similar to this in other prophets, where you have the prophet maybe say something and then God responds to that. But it does seem like in most of those cases, they do take the message and they go back to the people and they repeat the message. We see that even mentioned a few times. With Habakkuk, I don't know if we see that very much. It seems like we just have a conversation and we're given an insight into maybe how a prophet would feel in this situation, and then also how God feels about the situation. And that is maybe a little interesting about how Habakkuk decides to go about this conversation, and then how God handles it anyway.
Before we get into Habakkuk, I think there is something else that would be helpful. So when, I don't think we mentioned this, when Josiah dies, what happens? What? Okay, yeah, but who becomes king?
His son, Jehoahaz.
Jehoahaz. Did we say that?
No.
I'm sorry. All right. So what does it say about Jehoahaz? He's going to be taken off the throne.
So it doesn't say it in 2 Chronicles.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So
in 2 Kings it does.
Okay. So does it give a summary of? It doesn't give a summary.
Are you talking about just like what kind of king?
Yeah. What kind of king is he?
That's in 2 Kings.
Yeah. He's wicked. All right. What was God's promise? That judgment's coming. It's not going to come in Josiah's day, because Josiah he humbled himself before the Lord. Josiah's out of the picture now, and what are we back to in Judah? An evil king. So what do you expect's coming? Yeah, okay, so we've got a heads up on that. So it's going to be in this context that Habakkuk is going to prophesy. The wickedness is back. We're not in the good days of Josiah anymore. The wickedness is back, and Habakkuk has a real problem with what's going on, how wicked it is. And so he's got some questions for God. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's fine. Because I think what you're going to see, and especially in chapter 1, and this is what you're bringing up, is some of the same stuff that we saw whenever we were going through, let me see if I can look at it. Whenever we're going through Jeremiah, where Jeremiah is questioning what the people are like and how they're acting. I think we're going to have some very similar things here with Habakkuk. And again, I think it makes maybe more sense when you get past Josiah to talk about these kind of characteristics in the people.
Yeah.
And of course, Jeremiah starts in Josiah's reign, but then he goes a long time, right? So when you see some of those things in Jeremiah, maybe some of those are past Josiah's, maybe they're starting in Josiah's reign. I don't know. But here with Habakkuk, I think that does make sense.
So he starts off, the burden which the prophet Habakkuk saw. He cries out to the Lord, "O Lord, how long shall I cry and you not hear? Even cry out to you violence, and you will not save. So what's his problem with God? What is his complaint with God? Yes, you're not doing enough, God. Do you not see how much wickedness is here? Why aren't you doing more? I'm crying out to you, and you see this stuff, surely, but you're not doing anything. Why do you show me iniquity and cause me to see trouble? For plundering and violence are before me. There is strife and contention arises. Therefore, the law is powerless. Justice never goes forth. The wicked surround the righteous. Therefore, perverse judgment proceeds. This is a mess down here, God, and you're not doing anything about it. That's his complaint. That's his complaint. Why aren't you doing something about it? All right, so that's the first question. There's going to be a series of questions in Habakkuk. And the first question is, God, why are you not doing something about this wickedness? Have you ever felt that way before? Have you ever felt like, God, you're not doing enough? There's so much wickedness and trouble and problems going on, and you're not doing enough to solve it. That's his complaint. So we can relate to that some. We can relate to that.
But even in that, you look at some of these phrases here and it's like, oh, those are some pretty pointed phrases to say to Jehovah. So yours said it a little bit differently in verse 3, but mine says, why do you make me see iniquity, and why do you idly look at wrong? So, I mean, when you're talking about God looking at wrong and saying, you look at it and you just sit there and stare at it. It's like, is that what we know of God? No. So this is a pretty strong statement to say to Jehovah. And that statement of God being idle will come up again from Habakkuk. But
I don't think
accusatory.
I don't think that Habakkuk just has like he's just a big grump. I think what it is he sees what a lot of times we perceive, and that is that it doesn't look like God's doing much. It looks like a bunch of wickedness going on. God's not intervening and stopping it. And so sometimes that's the way it looks. However,
well, and let me say this. I think this book might be written for that purpose, right? Of saying that if we have these kind of feelings, then we should know how to address it, or we should know what the evidence is, maybe based off of.
That's right. So God replies in verse 5, look among the nations and watch. Be utterly astounded, for I will work a work in your days, which you would not believe, though it were told you. For indeed, I am raising up the Chaldeans, a bitter and hasty nation. God, why aren't you doing something to punish these wicked people? And God says, I am doing something. What's he doing? The Chaldeans. And what kind of people are the Chaldeans? Worse than the Assyrians. Are they worse than the people of Judah? They're worse than the people of Judah. And so I'm going to bring them, and verse 7 says, they are terrible and dreadful. Verse 9, they all come for violence. Verse 11, when they're successful, they commit offenses and imputing the power to his gods. When they're victorious, they say, our gods gave us victory. And so here's Habakkuk saying, the people of Judah are wicked. Why aren't you doing something about it? And God said, I am doing something. I'm bringing up the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, to punish them. And the Babylonians, they are fierce. They are terrible. They are ungodly. Now what would be your question? Why are you using them? They're worse than us. And so now you've got a double problem. You had wickedness, needs to be punished. God's punishing it, but he's punishing it with the people that are more wicked than the wickedness that he's punishing. And so have you ever had those type of thoughts before? Like, well, why would God solve it this way? Well, that's what he has. That's his second question.
But in verse 5, when God answers, he says that he's going to do something that he will not believe, that maybe Habakkuk thought, all right, this is going good. And then he says, no, it's the Babylonians.
Yeah.
Well, wonders are good things, right?
Yeah.
It will be a wonder, but not a great one.
And it is interesting, how many times in the Bible does the way that man thinks something should be solved different from the way that God thinks it should be solved? Almost every time. That's right. All right, any thoughts through verse 11 before we get into the next section?
Well, I might say this. So again, with Jeremiah and Habakkuk both, I think they both want evildoers to be punished. I think they both want evildoers to be dealt with. But and I don't know exactly, you were talking about like the way God thinks versus the way man thinks. I don't know exactly what Habakkuk and maybe Jeremiah thought was going to happen, and here specifically with Habakkuk. I don't know if he thought God was just going to be like, poof, they're gone. But the way this is going to be dealt with is going to affect the righteous as well. And I think that's what he is feeling whenever we go into this next section, is saying, okay, well, I wanted them dealt with, but now you're bringing a people that's going to affect everybody and affect everybody in a very horrible way. And you know, again, like you talked about earlier, like the way he's describing it is like, these are, you know, bitter, hasty, evil people. They're not the kind of people you want taking care of it because they'll affect everyone.
So let's see if we could put this into something. How many of you think that the United States of America has some big problems, some wickedness that takes place that needs to be taken care of? Can we all agree on that? You do? Okay. Well, what if we cried out to God and say, God, why are you allowing this to go on? And God says, hey, I'm going to take care of it. I'm bringing in North Korea. North Korea is going to take over the United States. So what would be your initial response to that? Why? Because you live here, and you know righteous people that do live in the United States, and are the righteous people going to suffer if the North Koreans take over as well? Yeah, and so I think that's part of Habakkuk's problem here too, is, well, wait a minute. That's how is that solving the problem? And so in verse 12, he responds, and his response to God is, now God, you know everything, and you're righteous. I don't see how this could work. So look at verse 12. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. Lord, you have appointed them for judgment. O rock, you have marked them for correction. Okay, I see that. In the verse 13, you are purer eyes than to behold evil. You cannot look on wickedness. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours one more righteous than he? And I think what he's saying here is, how could you allow that when the Babylonians are more wicked than the men of Judah? I don't see how you, knowing your character, could do that. I don't see how that would work.
And again, mine uses the phrase there, why do you look idly, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up one more righteous than he? And so, again, you have the idea of, you know, calling the Lord idle is interesting. Mm-hmm. Whenever he initially wasn't doing something about the evil people you wanted, and now he is. It's like, well, now you're being idle in the other way.
Yep.
And so,
and what Habakkuk realizes is the same thing we would realize if we found out that North Korea was going to take over. And that is, everybody's going to suffer if that's the case. Not just the wicked. Everybody's going to suffer. So you see this in verse 14. Why do you make men like fish of the sea, like creeping things that have no ruler over them? They take up all of them with their hook. They catch them in their net. They gather them in their dragnet. Everybody's going to be involved in that punishment if that's the way that it's going to work. And then the Babylonians, what they're going to do, they're going to sacrifice to their net. They're going to give credit to their gods. That doesn't glorify your name. I don't see how any of this works. I don't see how any of this makes sense. And so we see this struggle of a man who sees wickedness, wants something to be done about it. God tells him his plan and goes, I don't get that at all. Well, that's exactly what God said. He said, you will be utterly astonished. I will work a work in your days which you would not believe. You wouldn't think of it this way. But this is what I'm going to do.
And then you look at verse 1 of chapter 2. And it says, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. And so basically what you have there is he's like, look, I don't really understand what's going on. I don't think I like it very much, but I'm going to wait and figure out what's going to happen here. So he's going to watch and he's going to wait to see what the Lord answers.
And I wonder if his thinking is that he feels like he just made a pretty good argument to God. That, God, I don't think that could work. And so your character doesn't match up with that plan, and so what do you have to say about that? And so now he's waiting for God's reply, and God is going to reply. And so God replies, and the Lord says, write the vision, make it plain on tablets, that he who runs may read it. In other words, make it so obvious that even a person running by could, at a glance, understand it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time. At the end it will speak, and I will not lie. It will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. So He makes this argument and says, God, I don't think that'll work. And what does God say? It's going to work. That's the way it's going to be. That's the way it's going to be. Okay. So Habakkuk's argument there, he thought was solid, but God said, no, that doesn't make sense. You got anything you want to say through verse 4? That's right. It's going to be in God's time. Yes. Very good. Yes. Very good.
So I might, in verse 4, talk just a second about that. I don't want to make too much of a point on this, but I just want to mention it. So it says, behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him, but the righteous shall live by his faith, is what mine says. So I just want to point out, so I think we hear this, and again, I don't want to do too much of this, but we hear the phrase, the righteous shall live by faith, a lot. And I think we get maybe the interpretation of it as the righteous just have to believe. What's interesting about this word faith here is that if you look at how it's usually translated in the Old Testament, I think this is maybe the only time it's translated just as the word faith. Most time it's translated as faithfulness, sometimes trust. But it might change a little bit if we talk about the righteous shall live by his faithfulness as opposed to live by his faith. Because then I think you may get a little bit more a fuller picture of what that looks like, what it means to live by faithfulness as opposed to faith.
So we mentioned the question that we would have if we found out that North Korea was going to take over and punish the United States for its wickedness is, well, what about the righteous? What about the righteous? And what's God's answer about the righteous?
They should continue in their faith.
That's right. They will live by faith. So God's going to punish, and how it's consistent with his character is the faithful are going to survive this. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy on them, but they're going to survive it. The proud, if you think that the answer is, well, by our strength, we're going to defeat the Babylonians, no, that's not going to work. The way you're going to survive is by being faithful to the Lord. So give me an example of people who were faithful to the Lord when the Babylonians came in and lived by faith. Daniel, that's exactly right. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Those are all men who lived by faith. And so the answer here becomes, all right, well, I don't understand. If that's going to come in, what about the righteous? Well, the righteous are going to have to be faithful. And if they're faithful, they can still be what they need to be. They can still survive this. And we see that carried out as we go on.
Did he go to Babylon?
I don't know that we have any record of him. I mean, this is just a few years before the first captivity, so I would say that there's a good chance that he's going to live to see this, unless he was incredibly old, or something happened to him. I don't know. I don't know of any record that tells us any more additional information. But certainly, it's not like, no, that's still going to be 100 years off, so he wouldn't have been around. He normally, under normal circumstances, probably would have been around. All right, starting in verse 5. God's going to talk about that he's well aware of the wickedness of the Babylonians, because I think Habakkuk is saying, well, you must not know what the Babylonians are like. Just like we would say, oh, God, now, North Korea, they're a bunch of atheists. They're cruel atheists. Surely, I mean, you wouldn't use them. And what God does in the latter part of chapter, or the rest of chapter 2, is to say, oh, I know exactly what Babylon is like. They're proud. Verse 5 says, he enlarges his desire as hell, and like death, he cannot be satisfied, or like Sheol, the grave. And he's proud, and he's covetous, and he wants everything. And they're wicked. The Babylonians are wicked. And so there's a series of woes that are described here. But I think it's not only describing Babylon, is describing wickedness as a whole. That's the very thing that Habakkuk was crying out for initially, is what about this wickedness? Do something about it. And God says, woe is coming on those who are wicked, for the people of Judah who are wicked, and eventually for the Babylonians who are wicked. All the wicked will get what's coming to them. Yes, sir.
Can I ask a question right quick? And this may be a little bit of a side note, but and I've probably been told this 100 times. But we know there's not going to be total destruction. because of the promise that was made to Abraham, correct?
Yes.
So how often would have these people been reminded of that? Would they have been read that on a regular basis, or
The law, you're asking?
like through the law? Would they have been? Would they know this? Would they know that promise is in effect, so to speak?
Yeah, well, you would think during Josiah's reign that the law seemed to have been read and taught, and so you would think maybe, but then think about before Josiah, they didn't even know a copy existed. They found a copy, of it. So certainly there would have been times, I think, that they would have probably been ignorant of a lot of these promises and not comprehended them. But other times they should have known. And, a lot of the Psalms, which were, songs are easier to remember sometimes than law. And if those were passed down, a lot of the Psalms talked about the hope of the seed of David and so forth and the promises there. But
and they've had prophets.
They've had prophets, yeah.
Say that. They may not have listened to the prophets, but they had it told to them.
It just seems to me, as you get into this and you see this captivity coming, we know that Jesus is going to come through Judah.
Yes.
So, I didn't know whether they had an understanding of that or if they were just totally ignorant of it.
Yeah. I would guess that there's probably times where some generations had a better understanding than others on that, but I don't know what the current generation would be under Jehoahaz. Well, coming right off of Josiah, I think they should probably have some idea. There, we see some righteous people in there, but I don't know. And even then, their understanding of it, to what degree would you understand it? I mean, we're looking in hindsight. We have inspired commentary in the New Testament that say, hey, this fulfills the promise here, but
They didn't know exactly how it was going to happen.
exactly, they didn't know exactly how it was going to happen. And so they may look at this and say, well, there's no way that Judah could go into captivity because the promise is going to come through Judah. So that can't happen. Or maybe they were completely ignorant of that altogether. I don't know.
Do you mind if I summarize what you were just talking about with all the woes?
Yeah, go ahead.
With a little bit more detail. So basically in 6 through 17, verses 6 through 17, you have him say, woe to the one who plunders others and takes pledges. And then basically the warning here is, don't you realize that when you do that, and you almost basically you're making your own enemies realize they're going to rise up and strike back at you eventually for your wicked and violent ways? Then he goes, woe to him who gets evil gain for your house. What you don't realize is you've brought shame upon yourself and your house. And so there's a lot of these interesting contrasts saying, like, this is what you've done and you think it serves this purpose, but really serving the opposite purpose, or it's going to come back upon you. So one of the things he talks about here is you've killed others, but you don't realize that by killing others in the way you have, you're forfeiting your own life. So they believe that, they're keeping themselves alive, but they're not. They're forfeiting their life because of how they're treating others. Then you have woe to the one who builds towns and cities with violence. Woe to the one who takes advantage of his neighbor. And so it talks about the idea of looking at their nakedness. Now, I don't know exactly what that means in some ways, other than you're looking at their shame, and I assume maybe it's to mock them, to ridicule them. And what they don't realize is that what they're doing is they're filling up their own shame in this. And so it talks about how their glory is actually going to be shame. And so again, you see this, they think they're doing one thing to other people, and what they don't realize is that all these things are coming back upon themselves. And he ends really here near the end of verse 17 saying, the Lord won't forget these things, and you're going to experience these things because you've imposed them upon other people. And so he's talking about their wickedness and what they've done to others, saying these things are going to come back upon your own head. And do you mind if I finish out chapter 2 there?
Let me mention something here about the woes. If you look in verse 8, talking about Babylon, because you have plundered many nations, all the remnant of the people shall plunder you. So God, you can't use the Babylonians, they're more wicked. And God says, when I get done using the Babylonians, what am I going to do? I'm going to punish them for their wickedness. Okay, going back to in Jeremiah chapter 25, it says, this whole land, talking about the land of Judah, shall be desolate and in astonishment, and the nation shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years. All right, so Judah is going to be punished by Babylon. It shall come to pass when the 70 years are complete that I will punish the king of Babylon and the nation and the land of the Chaldeans for the iniquity, says the Lord. I will make it a perpetual desolation. I will bring on that land all the words which I have prophesied against it. So here's this, what he's revealing to Habakkuk and Jeremiah is, yes, I'm going to use them to punish the wickedness of Judah, and then I will punish the wickedness of the Chaldeans, the Babylonians.
Okay, so then in or the end of chapter 2, verses 18 through 20, I just want to point this out, is what you have here is you have God comparing himself to an idol. He says, you have these idols, what are they? They are nothing. And yet what you do is you go to your idols and say, speak, tell me something, give me some type of knowledge. But of course they can't. And then you have the verse at the very end in verse 20, and it says, but, and contrast this, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. So you have these idols that are not alive. They can't do anything. They hold no type of wisdom. And in contrast, you have the Lord, who is alive, who is working, who is bringing about judgment. And instead of having to come to him and say, speak to us, tell us something, you stay in silence before him. Listen to what he has to say, because he will speak. And so I think it's an interesting kind of contrast there, because of where they've put their faith will not avail anything. And he's saying, look to me. I'm the one that is working. I'm the one that's going to tell you what you need.
Thinking about that last phrase, though, the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silent before him. Would that apply to Habakkuk as well? What is Habakkuk doing? Yeah, and what's his charge against God is, God, you're not seeing what's going on here. You're not handling this right. And God says, I've got a plan. I'm going to accomplish it. And I think that this was true of the nations, that the nations didn't need to try to seek guidance from idols, but Habakkuk needed to be careful that he didn't look up to the true and living God and say, you don't know what you're doing. And so maybe there's a little charge, and Habakkuk seems to get it, because in chapter 3, it's almost like a different Habakkuk. His attitude has changed to like, you're not, first it was, you're not doing enough. And then it was like, you're doing too much. And now it's going to be, I'm going to trust you to do what's right. 2 minutes. You want to save it? Okay. Well, let's. I think we can cover this, because we don't have a lot to cover here. Look at verse 2. Here's what Habakkuk says. O Lord, I have heard your speech and was afraid. Yeah, that was troubling, wasn't it? That was troubling news. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years, and in the midst of the years make it known. In wrath, do what? Okay. You carry out your plan however you see best. Just please be merciful. Please be merciful. Remember us in that. And so, anything you want to say till verse 16 even?
Well, basically what happens to verse 16 is you have Habakkuk describe God's might and the judgment he's going to bring, and how it's going to affect, or how it can affect the world.
Yes. And so God is coming.
And it's for, I just want to mention this, verse 13, for the salvation of his people, which is interesting. Okay.
So verse 16, when I heard, my body trembled, my lips quivered at the voice, rottenness entered my bones. I trembled with myself that I might rest in the day of trouble when it comes upon the people. He will invade them with his troops. In other words, it's a fearful thing to know that God is coming in judgment, because he can do whatever he wants to do. And that's what Habakkuk is saying, is when I heard this, it was terrifying to me, because I realized God could do whatever. But then look at verse 17. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vine, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock be cut off from the field, and there be no herd in the stalls. In other words, if all is doom and gloom, if all is disaster, if all of these things happen, verse 18, yet I will rejoice in the Lord, I will joy in the God of my salvation. Even so, I'll trust in God. The just shall live by faith. And so I'm going to have faith, and I'm going to trust in God. Verse 19, the Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet, and he will make me to walk on the high hills. And so, what a different man compared to chapter 1. So what has Habakkuk learned? God's way is best. Trust in the Lord. Does God see the wickedness that's taking place? Is God going to take care of it? Is it going to be exactly the way we think it may need to be taken care of? What do we need to do when it's not the way that we think it should be taken care of? We need to trust in God. The just shall live by faith.
That's good.
Thank y'all. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.